My husband would come home smelling of another woman's perfume. I thought it was just work meetings until the day I decided to follow him and discovered a truth that would change my life forever. Hello, my name is Teresa Oliver Sanders. I'm 82 years old, born in 1943 in the small town of Riverdale in rural Pennsylvania. Before I begin sharing my story, I'd like to ask you watching now to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always nice to know that my words are reaching people from different places. I'm going to tell you a story today that I've kept in my heart for many years. A story of pain, but also of rebirth. You know, when I was young, I was a girl full of dreams. I grew up in an era when a woman's greatest dream was to get married, have children, and build a happy home. And that's exactly what I sought to do. I met Charles in 1957 at a church gathering in our town. He had just moved there from the city. He was a tall man with dark, well-combed hair, always impeccable in his attire. Different from the other young men in our small town, Charles had a sophisticated air about him. He spoke well, had studied more than most, worked as a salesman for a large construction materials company, and had plans to move up in life. I fell in love almost instantly. At the time, I was 18 and had never had a serious relationship. Charles was 25, had lived more, seen more of the world. When he began courting me, my friends were green with envy. "Teresa, you've caught the best bachelor in town," they would say, laughing. And I truly believed I had been blessed. We dated for just over a year. My father was strict, one of those old-fashioned men. He didn't allow us to be alone. There always had to be someone nearby. Today I understand he just wanted to protect me, but at the time I thought it was excessive. We married in May 1958 in a simple but beautiful ceremony at the town's main church. I remember every detail of that day. My white dress sewn by my mother and aunts, the wildflowers decorating the church, Charles's smile waiting for me at the altar. I swore that would be the beginning of the perfect life I had always dreamed of. Shortly after the wedding, we moved to Chicago. Charles had gotten a promotion at his company. He would now be a sales supervisor in the big city. I had never left my small town. Imagine the shock. Chicago was already enormous back then, noisy, full of cars and hurried people. In the first few months, I cried from homesickness for my family, my friends, the peaceful rhythm of my little town. But Charles said it was the price of progress, that we had to sacrifice some things to achieve better ones. We rented a small apartment in Lincoln Park. It wasn't luxurious, but it was our first little home. I dedicated myself to transforming that place into a cozy home. I sewed the curtains, arranged every detail with care. Charles left early for work and returned in the late afternoon. On weekends, he would take me to explore the city. We went to the movies, occasionally dined out when money allowed. They were happy times, simple but happy. In 1959, our first son was born, Charles Jr. It was an immense joy. Charles seemed proud, showing photos of the baby to everyone at work. I became a mother body and soul, dedicating myself entirely to that little creature who depended so much on me. In 1961, our daughter, Mary Helen, arrived. And 2 years later, in 1963, we completed our family with Robert. 3 small children, a house to care for, a husband to attend to. My days were full, exhausting, but I didn't complain. It was what all women of my time did. It was what was expected of us. Charles continued to advance in the company, earning more, occasionally traveling for work. In 1964, we managed to buy our first house, a 2-story home in Oak Park. We were no longer renting. It was quite an achievement. The new house brought new energy to us. Charles bought our first car, a blue Volkswagen Beetle. I learned to drive, even though he said I didn't need to, that he would take me wherever I wanted. But with 3 small children, I insisted it would be useful. My life revolved around the children, the house, the domestic routine. I made a point of keeping everything impeccable. Meals always ready at the right time, the children always clean and well-behaved. I wanted Charles to be proud of the family we had built. It was around 1965 that things began to change. Charles was now a sales manager, had a team under him, including a new secretary, Marcia. He started coming home later, saying work was more demanding. At first, I didn't question it. After all, he was working hard for our good, wasn't he? But then I noticed a pattern. Fridays, specifically, he always came home very late. He said it was the day for meetings with important clients, for closing the week's deals. And there was something else, a different smell on his clothes. It wasn't the cologne I knew, the one I had given him as a gift. It was a feminine perfume, sweet, distinctive. The first time I smelled it, I was confused. I thought perhaps it was the perfume of some client that had transferred to his clothes during a meeting. But the smell kept appearing, always on Fridays. When I washed his shirts, I could smell that aroma embedded in the collar, sometimes even slight lipstick stains. My heart ached, but I kept my anguish silent. I was afraid to ask, afraid of the answer I might hear. You need to understand what it was like to be a woman in those days. We didn't have the same freedoms you have today. A woman with 3 children, no profession, financially dependent on her husband. What choices did I have? Besides, divorce wasn't even legalized in America at that time. Separation was a scandal, a failure, a shame for the family. So I pretended I didn't see, that I didn't smell that strange perfume. On Friday nights, I would put the children to bed earlier and sit in the living room, looking at the clock, each minute seeming like an eternity. Charles would sometimes arrive after midnight with ready excuses. Meetings that ran late, clients who asked to have dinner, documents that needed urgent review. Once I gathered the courage and asked about the perfume. He laughed, said I was imagining things, that it was my paranoia. "You're trapped in this house all day with the kids, Teresa. You're going crazy." His words hurt more than a slap. I began to doubt myself. Was it really all in my head? But then, one Wednesday afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. It was Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor. She worked as a cashier at that elegant restaurant downtown, the Taverna. She came to bring me a cake, and between sips of coffee, she dropped the bombshell. "Teresa, I don't know if I should say this, but as a friend, I feel I need to. I saw your husband at the restaurant last week, at a reserved table with a young woman. They seemed, well, intimate." The cake got stuck in my throat. I asked for details. Mrs. Johnson described the woman, young, light hair, well-dressed. "She wore a strong perfume, the kind you can smell from a distance," she commented. It was the same perfume I smelled on his shirts. That night, I couldn't sleep. The suspicions I tried to suppress now had a face, a place. Charles was cheating on me, probably with that secretary of his. Marcia had come to dinner at our home several times, had held my children in her arms, had praised my cooking, and now she was destroying my marriage. I decided I needed to be certain. I couldn't live in that anguish, that doubt anymore. The following Friday, I prepared everything, got the children ready, and left them with Charles's sister, saying I needed to do special shopping for his upcoming birthday. I wore my best outfit, that navy blue ensemble I saved for special occasions. I put on lipstick, fixed my hair. In my coat pocket, I placed the money I had been saving in secret, a few dollars from each grocery trip, from each purchase I made. I took a bus downtown and waited in front of Charles's office. My heart was beating so hard, I thought people on the street could hear it. When he came out, around 6 in the evening, he didn't head toward the bus stop that would take him home. He walked in the other direction. I followed, keeping my distance, hiding behind other people. He walked a few blocks and entered a flower shop. He came out with a bouquet of red roses. The tightness in my chest increased. Who were those flowers for? Certainly not for me, who hadn't received flowers since the birth of our youngest child. I continued following him. A few blocks later, he arrived at the Taverna, the same restaurant Mrs. Johnson had mentioned. He entered confidently, like someone who knows the place well. I waited a few minutes outside, gathering courage. Finally, I went in too. The restaurant was elegant, with white tablecloths, candles, soft music in the background. I asked to use the bathroom, and on the way, I saw it. The table in the somewhat hidden corner. Charles sitting with his back to the entrance, facing her. Marcia, his secretary, smiling as she received the roses. They toasted with glasses of wine, their hands touching across the table, and then he leaned in and kissed her on the lips. A lingering, passionate kiss. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The air left me, my legs weakened. I ran out of the restaurant, not caring about the curious glances from other diners. On the street, the tears came uncontrollably. I cried at the bus stop. I cried during the entire journey back. I cried while picking up my children from my sister-in-law's, but when I got home, I dried my tears. A strength I didn't know I had took over me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my children too. What example would I set for them if I accepted this situation? What lesson would my daughter learn about her value as a woman? I put the children to bed and waited. That night, Charles came home later than usual, after 1 a.m. He carried on his lapel the same perfume I now knew so well, Marcia's perfume. When he entered the bedroom, thinking I would be asleep, I turned on the bedside lamp. "We need to talk, Charles," I said, with a calmness I don't know where I found. He stood frozen at the door, still holding the doorknob. I noticed the fear in his eyes, that look of someone caught by surprise. He tried to cover it up, of course. He smiled slightly and asked what was happening, why I was still awake at that hour. "I know where you were today. I was there. I saw you with her." The smile disappeared from his face. Charles closed the door slowly, as if fearing to wake the children, but I think, in reality, he was buying time to think of an excuse. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me, and began to remove his shoes. I remember observing his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about, Teresa. I've been working until now, meeting with clients." The lie came out so naturally that, for a second, I almost doubted what I had seen with my own eyes. Almost. But her perfume still hung in the air around him, reminding me of the truth he was trying to hide. "I saw you at the taverna with Marcia. I saw the flowers you bought for her. I saw you kissing her." He turned to me, his face a mixture of surprise and indignation. How dare I, his submissive wife of so many years, confront him like this? He tried indignation first. "You followed me? What kind of wife does that? Don't you trust me after all these years?" But I realized his words didn't have the force of innocence. It was the anger of someone who had been discovered, not of someone who had been unfairly accused. I didn't avert my gaze. I didn't back down. Years of doubt, months of anguish with that perfume, gave me a firmness I didn't know I had. "Answer my question, Charles. Are you having an affair with your secretary?" Silence filled our bedroom for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Outside, the city slept. In the room next door, our children dreamed, oblivious to the earthquake that shook the foundations of our family. Finally, he sighed in defeat. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." 5 words that confirmed my worst nightmare, and at the same time, freed me from the doubt that had been consuming me. I felt hot tears rolling down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness alone. There was anger there, anger for having been deceived, for having my trust so coldly betrayed. "How long?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Charles stood up, began to pace the room. He seemed relieved to finally be able to speak, as if keeping that secret had also been a burden for him. "A little over a year. It started during a business trip to New York. She went with me to organize the presentation documents. A year, more than a year of lies, of sleepless nights waiting, of Fridays tormented by her perfume." I closed my eyes, trying to process the extent of the betrayal. It wasn't a slip, a momentary error. It was a conscious choice, repeated week after week. "Why, Charles? What did I do wrong?" He sat down again, now in the armchair near the window, distant from me, both physically and emotionally. It's not you, Teresa. You didn't do anything wrong. It's that you changed. After the children, you only think about them, only talk about them. The house, the boys, Mary Helen. There was no space left for us, for me. Marcia listens to me. She's interested in my work, my ambitions. His words hit me like stabs. I had dedicated my life to building our home, to caring for our children, and now that was being used against me. As if loving and protecting our children were a defect, a flaw in me as a woman. So it's my fault for being a mother, for taking care of the family we built together. Charles ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration I knew well. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just trying to explain what happened. Marcia is different. She's young, lively, without the responsibilities you have. She makes me feel alive again. Each comparison was a new wound. The pain gave way to indignation. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the sleepless nights with sick children, the meals prepared with care, the always impeccable clothes he wore to impress his clients and colleagues. All my effort to be the perfect wife, and in the end, it hadn't been enough. Do you love her? The question escaped before I could contain it. Part of me didn't want to know the answer, but another part needed to hear the whole truth, however painful it might be. Charles hesitated, and his hesitation was answer enough. It's complicated, Teresa. I enjoy her company, her energy. But you are the mother of my children. We have a history together. It wasn't love for me. It was convenience, obligation. I deserved more than that. My children deserved more than a father who lived a lie. What do you intend to do now? Continue deceiving us, living this double life? He stood up again, restless, unable to face my gaze directly. I thought about us separating. You would keep the house, of course, and I would help financially with the children. I could see them on weekends, maybe. The coldness with which he spoke about destroying our family shocked me, as if he were discussing a commercial transaction, not the end of almost a decade of marriage, the future of 3 innocent children. The reality of the situation began to weigh on my shoulders. A separated woman in the 60s, with 3 small children to raise, no profession, no income of her own. The world out there would be cruel to me. You already have everything planned, don't you? While I was here, naively believing in our marriage, you were already planning to abandon us. Charles had the decency to look ashamed. It's not like that, Teresa. I still hadn't made a definitive decision, but now that you know, maybe it's better for everyone if we go our separate ways. At that moment, a clarity took hold of me. I saw my future dividing into 2 possible paths. I could despair, beg him to stay, accept crumbs of attention, and live in the shadow of another woman. Or I could find the strength to go on alone, to show my children what dignity and self-respect mean. The choice, though frightening, was clear. No, I said firmly. You're not simply going to decide our future like this. This house was also built with my work, my sacrifice. If anyone is going to leave here, it's you. The surprise on his face would have been comical in another situation. Charles wasn't expecting resistance from the submissive wife he knew. That new Teresa, with a firm voice and determined gaze, was a stranger to him. You can't be serious. How will you support yourself? How will you take care of the children alone? Be reasonable, Teresa. The condescension in his voice only fueled my determination. I stood up from the bed, facing him, though I was much shorter. I will find a way. I've always found ways to make things work in this house, haven't I? Tomorrow morning I want you and your things out of here. He laughed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh. You don't have that right. Legally, I'm the one who supports this family. You can't throw me out of my own house. He was right. Of course. The law was on his side. Laws were made by men, for men. But I wouldn't back down. Not anymore. Then I'll be happy to tell your parents, your siblings, your colleagues, and your boss about your affair with the secretary. I'm sure Mr. Mendez, so conservative and religious, would love to know that his sales manager is cheating on his wife with a company employee. It was a low blow, I know. But at that moment, I was fighting for my survival, for my children's future. Charles turned pale. His career, his reputation, everything he had built so carefully would be at risk if the scandal came to light. "You wouldn't do that." "Test me," I responded, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. We remained silent for a long moment, measuring strength, reevaluating each other in the new light. The marriage we had known had ended that night, regardless of what happened next. Finally, Charles took a pillow and a blanket from the closet. "I'll sleep in the living room. We'll talk more tomorrow when we're calmer." He left the room, gently closing the door so as not to wake the children. I was left alone with my thoughts, my pain, my fear of the future, but also with a growing certainty. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I lay looking at the ceiling, going over every moment of my marriage, every sign I ignored, every suspicion I suppressed. When the first rays of sun came through the window, I got up. I took a long shower, as if I could wash away the pain of betrayal. I dressed carefully, combed my hair, applied discreet lipstick, armed myself with the appearance of dignity, even though inside I was shattered. In the kitchen, I found Charles already dressed for work, drinking coffee in silence. He seemed to have aged 10 years in one night. Deep, dark circles marked his eyes, his face tired from a sleepless night. "I thought better," he said when he saw me. "You're right. It's better I leave, at least for now. I'll look for a hotel today." It wasn't a victory. There was no reason for celebration. It was just the first step of a difficult journey that lay ahead of me. I nodded in silence and began to prepare breakfast for the children, who would soon wake up with their energy and innocent questions. "How are we going to tell them?" I asked, my voice low so as not to be heard beyond the kitchen. Charles put his cup in the sink, avoiding my gaze. "We can say I need to travel for work for a while. It will give us time to decide how to proceed." Another lie. Our children deserved more than that, but I agreed. They were too young to understand the complexity of what was happening. The time for explanations would come later. When Junior, Mary Helen, and Robert came down for breakfast, we tried to act normally. Charles even played with them, something he rarely did. Perhaps the imminence of separation had reminded him of the value of those moments, or perhaps it was just guilt. I observed him interacting with our children, and a deep sadness invaded me. It wasn't just my marriage that was crumbling. It was the safe and happy world I had tried to build for them. After Charles left for work, with the promise to return in the afternoon to get some clothes, I was left alone with my thoughts and fears. What would I do now? How would I support my children? Where would I find strength to rebuild my life from these ruins? I didn't have all the answers yet. The path ahead seemed frightening, full of uncertainties. But one thing I knew for certain: that strange perfume, the perfume of betrayal that had invaded my home on Fridays, would never dictate the course of my life again. From that day on, I would write my own story with the ink of courage and dignity, and it would be a story of rebirth. The apartment felt strangely silent after Charles left that afternoon with 2 large suitcases. The children watched in confusion as their father said goodbye, with the promise that Daddy would return soon from his trip. I could see in their little eyes that they suspected something bigger was happening. Children sense things, you know. Even when we try to protect them, they pick up on the changes in the air. That first night alone was the hardest. After putting the children to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. I needed to do calculations, plan, find a way. The money Charles left would cover rent and basic expenses for 2 months, maybe 3 if we economized a lot. After that, what would we do? My formal education had stopped at high school. I had married so young, never had the chance to study more, to build a career. What did I know how to do? Cook, clean, sew, take care of children, valuable skills for a housewife, but ones the world out there didn't value as much as it should. The next morning, after dropping the children at school, I went to my cousin Adeline's house in Wicker Park. She had divorced a few years earlier. a scandal in the family at the time. Now I perfectly understood her situation. Adeline had managed to rebuild her life. She worked as a secretary in a law office. "I got this job because I knew how to type," she explained to me while serving me coffee. "You should learn too, Teresa. There are quick courses, not expensive. With a typing certificate, you can get work in offices, companies." I left there with a new purpose. The next day, I enrolled in a typing course downtown. I would use part of the money Charles left. It would be an investment in our future. For 6 weeks, every morning, after dropping the children at school, I went to the classes. My fingers hurt. My mind struggled to memorize the key positions, but I didn't give up. In the afternoon, I practiced at home, on a small typewriter borrowed from Adeline, while the children did their homework. In those same weeks, I faced another challenge: telling the truth to my family. My parents still lived in the countryside, conservative, devout Catholics. For them, marriage was sacred, indissoluble. How to explain that my husband had cheated on me, that we were separated? Fearful but determined, I traveled with the children to Riverdale one weekend. Their reaction was exactly what I feared. My mother cried. My father became furious, not with me, but with the situation, with Charles, perhaps even with the modern world that allowed such things to happen. "Go back to him, my daughter," my mother begged. "For the children, for what people will say. Men are like that. With time, he'll forget this other woman." I was shocked. My own mother thought I should accept betrayal as a natural part of marriage, that I didn't deserve more than that. "I can't, Mom. It wouldn't be life, it would be prison. My children deserve to see their mother happy, with dignity. And how will you support them? A woman alone in that big city with 3 children?" asked my father, his tone concerned but also critical. "I'm learning typing. I'll work, study. Others have managed. I can too." They weren't convinced, but they offered financial help while I established myself. I accepted, swallowing my pride. It wasn't time to refuse outstretched hands, no matter how much I wanted to prove I could do it alone. I returned to Chicago, determined to transform that temporary support into permanent independence. I graduated from the typing course with distinction. The teacher praised my speed and accuracy. With certificate in hand, I began to look for a job. It wasn't easy. Interview after interview, I heard the same questions. "Are you married? Do you have children? How will you care for the children if they get sick? Does your husband allow you to work?" The world wasn't prepared for women like me, separated, with children, seeking independence. Or, perhaps more accurately, it didn't want to prepare. It was at the 17th office I visited, a small real estate agency on Michigan Avenue, that I found my chance. The owner, Mr. Alcott, a gentleman in his 60s, had just lost his secretary to a larger company. "I've never hired a separated woman before," he said after interviewing me. "But my mother raised 6 children alone after my father died in the war. If you have half her strength, you'll do well here." I started working the following week. The salary was modest, less than half of what the previous secretary earned, but I accepted. It was the beginning, the door I so needed to open. The hours were from 8 to 5 with an hour for lunch, enough time to take the children to school before work, but not to pick them up. That's when I met Mrs. Wilson, a widowed lady who lived in the apartment next door. I offered to pay her to pick up Junior, Mary Helen, and Robert from school and stay with them until I returned from work. Money was tight, but this help was essential. "Keep your money, my dear," said Mrs. Wilson when I tried to pay for the first month. "I was also abandoned by my husband when young. I know how hard it is. You can pay me by making a cornbread on Sundays. It's my grandson's favorite when he visits." That unexpected generosity moved me to tears. I began to realize that, although the world could be cruel to a woman in my situation, there were also good people willing to extend a hand without judgment. At work, I faced new challenges. Mr. Alcott was fair, but some clients looked at me with distrust when they discovered my situation. Once I heard a man mutter to another in the waiting room, "A separated secretary, Imagine the moral values. Be careful what you say in front of her. I took a deep breath and continued my work as if I hadn't heard. Each veiled insult, each judgmental look only strengthened my determination. I would prove my worth by what I did, not by my marital status. At home, the children were slowly adapting to the new reality. Charles came to see them on Sundays, took them out, brought presents trying to compensate with objects for his daily absence. Junior, the oldest, at 7 years old then, began having problems at school. The teacher called me to talk. "He's been fighting with classmates, Mrs. Sanders. Yesterday, he pushed a boy who said his father had abandoned you." My heart ached. My son was fighting his own battles, defending himself from childish cruelty that only reflected the prejudice of adults. That night, I sat with him on the bed before sleep. "Junior, I know it's been difficult. People say things that hurt, but always remember your father didn't abandon you. He still loves you very much. Things changed between him and me, not between you." "But why did he leave? Was it because I did something wrong?" "No, my love, never think that. These are adult things, complicated to understand right now. One day you'll grow up, and we'll talk more about this. For now, I want you to know that none of this is your fault or your siblings, and that Mommy will always be here, no matter what happens." He fell asleep in my arms, and I stayed there, stroking his hair, silently promising that I would do everything so that these children would grow up happy, secure, loved. Months passed. Money was always tight, even with the child support Charles paid. Not regularly, I must say. I learned to mend clothes, to transform leftovers into tasty new meals, to find free entertainment for the children in the city parks. At work, I grew in confidence and skills. Mr. Alcott, recognizing my effort, offered me a small raise after 6 months. I also began learning about the real estate business, contracts, appraisals, financing. I absorbed every piece of information, every new knowledge, knowing that education was the way to improve our situation. It was around this time, at the end of 1966, that Charles appeared at the house on a Thursday night, outside his usual visiting schedule. He seemed nervous, anxious. "I need to talk to you, Teresa," he said after the children went to bed. We sat in the small living room. Charles looked older, more tired than I remembered. I wondered if life with Marcia was as wonderful as he had imagined. "I'm moving to New York," he announced. "The company is opening a branch there, and they've invited me to be the director." I felt a chill in my stomach. New York was almost 800 miles away. What would it mean for our children to have their father so far away? And the boys? And Mary Helen? What about your relationship with them? That's why I came to talk. I promised to come to Chicago at least once a month to see them. And during school vacations, they can spend some time with me in New York. Once a month. From a scarce presence, Charles would become almost a memory in the children's lives. But there was nothing I could do to prevent it. "Marcia is going with you, I imagine." He looked away, confirming without words. "Yes, actually, we're expecting a child." Those words hit me like a punch. A child. While my children would lose even more of their father's presence, another would be raised with him daily. The injustice of it suffocated me for a moment. "I hope you're a better father to that child than you've been to ours these last few months." It was all I could say, my voice trembling with contained emotion. Charles had the decency to look ashamed. He promised to increase the child support to compensate for his less frequent visits. Promises. Men like him always had so many promises on the tip of their tongue. After he left, I cried. Not for the loss of him as a husband, that pain had already healed, but for what his children would lose. However, as in every difficult moment since our separation, I dried my tears and sought strength within myself. If Charles would be even more absent, I would need to be even more present, even stronger. The following week, I enrolled to complete my studies in the evening program. Mr. Alcott, understanding, allowed me to leave half an hour early to get to classes. Mrs. Wilson agreed to stay with the children for a few more hours. The routine became exhausting. Work, studies, children, house, but each small progress fueled my determination. On nights when fatigue seemed unbearable, when bills piled up on the table and money didn't last until the end of the month, I would look at my 3 children sleeping and find the strength to continue. They were my purpose, my motivation, my greatest achievement. The year 1967 brought new challenges and small victories. Charles moved to New York as planned. The monthly visits soon became bi-monthly, then quarterly. The children felt the absence, especially little Robert, who at just 5 years old was beginning to forget what it was like to have his father around daily. But there were also joys. I completed high school with good grades. We celebrated birthdays with simple but love-filled parties. We created new traditions for our redefined family. In December of that year, I managed to save enough to buy a small Christmas tree and modest presents for each child. On Christmas Eve, while they slept anxiously awaiting the next morning, I sat alone in the living room, contemplating the colorful lights on the tree. I reflected on the path traveled since that fateful Friday when I smelled the perfume of betrayal and decided to follow Charles. In less than 2 years, my life had completely transformed. From dependent and insecure wife to working woman, student, single mother, fighting for a better future. The path would still be long and difficult, I knew. But looking back at the obstacles I had already overcome, I felt a quiet pride growing inside me. That strange perfume that once caused me so much anguish had ironically opened the door for me to discover a Teresa I didn't even know. Strong, resilient, capable. The next morning, I woke to the excited shouts of the children, discovering their presence under the tree. Their smiles, their laughter were proof that we were moving forward. Not in the way I had imagined when young, not through the traditional path society expected, but through our own trail, built with courage and determination. And on that Christmas morning of 1967, among hugs and torn wrapping paper, I made a silent promise to myself. The story of my life would not be defined by the betrayal I suffered, but by the strength with which I rose after it. The perfume of betrayal had dissipated. Now we breathed the sweet aroma of reconstruction, of renewed hope. The years that followed were a long and arduous journey of self-discovery and growth. In early 1968, I made a decision that would completely change the course of my life. I enrolled in an evening teacher education program. Mr. Alcott, my boss at the real estate agency, not only supported my decision, but adjusted my schedule so I could attend classes. "Education is the only asset no one can take from you, Mrs. Sanders," he told me with the wisdom of his many years. The course was demanding, especially for someone in my situation. I woke at 5 a.m., prepared coffee and lunches for the children, tidied the house, worked all day, studied at night, and still needed to find energy to help with the kids' homework. Many times I fell asleep over my books, exhausted, only to wake a few hours later and start all over again. Junior, now 10, became my great ally. He took on responsibilities beyond his age, helping care for his younger siblings, assisting with household chores. Sometimes I worried if I wasn't robbing him of his childhood, if I wasn't placing too much weight on those young shoulders. "You don't need to do all this, son," I would say when I found him washing the dinner dishes or folding clothes. "I want to help, Mom. You do so much for us." Those words filled my eyes with tears. My boy was growing up seeing the example of hard work and perseverance, and it was shaping him into a responsible and compassionate young man. Mary Helen, at 7, also found her way to contribute, taking care of little Robert while I studied. The 3 formed a united team, as if they intuitively understood that we needed each other to survive in that world that didn't make life easy for families like ours. Charles, meanwhile, was becoming an increasingly distant figure. The promised visits became rare. The child support arrived with frequent delays. I learned through mutual acquaintances that he and Marcia had had a boy whom they named Richard. I tried not to harbor resentments. After all, that child wasn't to blame for his father's mistakes, but it was difficult not to feel a twinge of hurt thinking that my children were deprived of their father's presence, while the other received full attention. In 1969, a new challenge presented itself. The owner of the building where we lived decided to sell the apartments. We would have 6 months to leave or buy the property. Buying was completely beyond our financial possibilities. The prospect of finding another place to live with a rent we could afford, in a location that would allow the children to stay at the same school and me at the same job, seemed almost impossible. It was during this time that Mr. Alcott, noticing my constant worry, called me for a conversation in his office. "Mrs. Sanders, you've worked with me for almost 4 years. I've never seen a more dedicated and competent employee. You know the real estate market as well as I do now." I thanked him, confused about where this conversation was leading. "I have a proposal for you. My wife and I bought a little house in Florida for our retirement. We're thinking of moving there next year. I want to sell the agency, but not to just anyone. I want someone who will care for the business as I have for 30 years. My heart accelerated. Was he suggesting what I thought? "Would you be interested in buying it? I can facilitate the payment, make a fair price, teach you everything you still don't know about managing the business." I was speechless. Buy a business? Me, who could barely pay the monthly bills. It seemed an impossible dream. "Mr. Alcott, I'm very grateful for the trust, but how would I pay? I don't have savings. I'm just a determined woman who transformed her life when everything conspired against her," he completed. "Think about it. With the profits from the agency, you could buy your own house, give better education to the children. Consider it an investment in your future." I spent sleepless nights thinking about the proposal. I consulted Adeline, my cousin, who encouraged me to accept. I talked with my parents, who offered their modest savings to help with the down payment. Even Junior gave his opinion, with wisdom beyond his years. "Mom, Mr. Alcott trusts you. I trust you too." After weeks of reflection and planning, I accepted the proposal. We would sign a contract where I would give a small down payment and pay the rest over 5 years with a percentage of the profits. It was risky, scary, but also exciting. In January 1970, I officially became the owner of Alcott Real Estate. I kept the name in honor of the man who believed in me when few would. Mr. Alcott remained as a consultant for 6 months, teaching me the secrets of the business, introducing me to important clients, opening doors that would normally be closed to a woman in that sector. The first months were exhausting. Managing a business, however small, demanded much more from me than being an employee. Responsibilities multiplied, as did concerns. I hired a secretary, making a point of choosing a divorced woman with a child, giving her the same chance I had received, and I threw myself headfirst into the work. Surprisingly, being a woman in the real estate market turned out to be an unexpected advantage. Many female clients preferred to negotiate with me, feeling more comfortable and understood. I developed a different approach, less aggressive and more empathetic, which attracted families looking for their first home. Gradually, I built a reputation for honesty and competence that transcended gender prejudices. In August of that same year, with the first consistent profits, I managed to make a down payment on a small house in Oak Park, not far from the one I had shared with Charles years earlier. It was modest, needed renovations, but it was ours. I remember crying with emotion upon receiving the keys, a tangible symbol of our new life, conquered with so much sacrifice. The children were euphoric about the move. For the first time, each would have their own room. Junior, now 11, helped paint the walls of his, choosing a vibrant blue. Mary Helen decorated hers with magazine clippings and drawings she made at school. Little Robert, at 7, insisted on a bookshelf for the books he was beginning to collect. My youngest was already showing a love for reading that made me so proud. In December 1970, I graduated from the teaching program. The ceremony was simple, but to me, it meant the world. My children were in the audience, along with my parents, who came specially from the countryside for the event. Junior took a photo of me receiving the diploma. I still keep that picture, yellowed by time, a testament to my perseverance. Although I now had my own business, I didn't abandon the dream of teaching. In 1971, I secured a position as a substitute teacher at a municipal school near home. I organized myself to teach in the mornings while managing the real estate agency in the afternoons, with the help of my efficient secretary, Mrs. Lewis. Teaching revealed itself as my true vocation. There was something deeply gratifying in seeing the curious little eyes of the children light up when they understood a new concept, in shaping young minds, in being an example that knowledge transforms lives. Many of my students came from humble families, some facing difficult situations at home. I recognized in their gazes the same determination I saw in my children's eyes, the will to overcome adverse circumstances. Around this time, I received an unexpected call from Charles. We hadn't spoken directly in over a year. Our communications were limited to messages transmitted through the children during his rare visits. "I heard you've been quite successful, Teresa, a businesswoman now. Imagine that." There was a note of surprise in his voice, perhaps even a touch of resentment. "Life goes on, Charles. We do what we need to for our children." He hesitated before revealing the true reason for the call. "I'm coming back to Chicago. The New York branch didn't work out as we expected. They asked me to return to the headquarters here." My heart accelerated. What would this mean for us, for the children? And Marcia, the baby? Another uncomfortable silence. "They're not coming with me. It didn't work out between us either." A petty part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The man who destroyed our family for a passion now saw that same passion dissolve. But I suppressed that impulse. Nothing good would come from feeding old resentments. "I'm sorry," was all I said, and I surprised myself by actually feeling a bit of compassion. Time dulls even the sharpest pains. I wanted to see the children more now that I'll be back. Maybe we could try again, you and I. That proposal caught me completely off guard. Return to Charles after all we had been through, after all the path I had traveled alone? "Charles, that's not possible. I've built a new life for myself, for our children. You'll always be their father, and for that, you'll have my respect. But us two, as a couple, that chapter is closed." He didn't insist. Perhaps he already expected this answer. Perhaps he had perceived in my voice the different woman I had become. No longer the insecure young woman who depended on him for everything, but a person complete in herself. We arranged a new arrangement for visits to the children, more frequent now that he would be in the same city. To my surprise, he agreed to regularize the child support without arguments. That conversation marked the beginning of a more mature relationship between us. Not friends, certainly, but adults capable of civility for the good of our children. The years 1972 and 1973 were of consolidation and growth. The real estate agency prospered, allowing me to hire another employee. I secured a permanent position as a teacher, dividing my time between the classroom and business. The children flourished at school. Junior was already talking about going to college for engineering. Mary Helen showed talent for the arts. Robert devoured books with impressive voracity. Our house became a true home, full of laughter, music, lively conversations during dinner. On Friday nights, I instituted the tradition of a special dinner. I would prepare something different, put the best tablecloth on the table, and we would talk about our weeks, our dreams, our plans for the future. Those Friday nights, which once brought me so much anguish from the perfume of betrayal, were reframed, transformed into moments of celebration of our family union. In 1974, I made another important decision. I enrolled in a college education program. Studying at a higher level at 35, balancing work and motherhood, seemed crazy to many, but I had already learned that the limits imposed on us are often just social constructs, imaginary barriers we can break down with enough determination. I remember my first class at college, sitting among young people fresh out of high school. I felt out of place initially, questioning if I had made a mistake. But I soon discovered that my life experience brought a depth to the discussions that my younger colleagues appreciated. The professors valued my contributions, my practical view of teaching grounded in years in the classroom. Junior, now 15, took on even more responsibilities at home to support me on this new journey. I was proud to see how my example inspired him to value education, to pursue his own goals with dedication. "One day we'll study at college together, Mom," he joked. I laughed, but deep down, that idea filled me with indescribable joy. Indeed, a few years later, it almost happened. Him starting engineering while I was finishing education. It was during this period that I also began to notice the changes in society around me. The feminist movement was gaining strength in America, even under social pressures. Divorce, female education, women in the workplace, topics that were once taboo now entered everyday conversations. I realized that my personal story, my struggles and achievements, were part of something bigger, a gradual transformation in the social structures that had for so long limited female possibilities. It wasn't just about me anymore, about overcoming my personal tragedy. It was about opening paths, showing that other futures were possible for women in situations similar to mine. In 1975, completely free from the debts of buying the agency, I expanded the business, opening a second unit in another neighborhood. Alcott Real Estate had become synonymous with reliability in the local market. My name, once whispered with pity or contempt as the poor woman who was left by her husband, was now mentioned with respect. "Mrs. Sanders, that competent businesswoman, you know?" Looking back at the Teresa from 10 years earlier, broken by betrayal, frightened by the uncertain future, alone with 3 small children, I could hardly believe the transformation. From the ashes of that destroyed marriage, a new woman had emerged, independent, fulfilled, capable of building not just a career, but a legacy. The perfume of betrayal, which once permeated my Fridays with anguish and insecurity, had completely dissipated. In its place remained the sweet aroma of personal victory, of regained dignity, of a future built with my own hands. And as I prepared for graduation from college in December of that year, with my 3 proud children in the audience, I knew that my true graduation had already occurred much earlier, on that fateful night when I decided not to accept less than I deserved, when I chose dignity despite fear, when I transformed the pain of betrayal into the strength for a complete reinvention. My graduation in education in December 1975 represented much more than a framed diploma on the wall. At 36, I was finally reaping the first fruits of years of sacrifice and determination. At the ceremony with my 3 children in the audience, Junior at 16, Mary Helen at 14, and Robert at 11, I felt an emotion that words can hardly describe. When my name was called and I walked to the stage to receive the diploma, I saw my firstborn discreetly wiping tears. That image was engraved in my heart, my son crying with pride for his mother. After the ceremony, we had a small celebration at our home. Nothing extravagant, just a few close friends, my parents who came from the countryside, colleagues from work and study. Mrs. Wilson, our neighbor who had helped us so much in the hardest times, prepared a cake specially decorated for the occasion. Looking around at those people who had walked by my side, I understood that I had built not just a career, but a network of genuine support, a community that had strengthened through shared adversities. The year 1976 brought an unexpected opportunity. The principal of the school where I taught was retiring, and to my surprise, recommended me to take her place. Teresa has the perfect combination of classroom experience, academic training, and administrative skills, she argued to the Board of Education. Besides, she knows the reality of our students like few do. Assuming the direction of a municipal school meant a better salary, more stability, but also more responsibilities. I would need to reorganize my life again, find a balance between the new role and the management of the real estate agency. After much reflection and conversations with my children, I accepted the challenge. "Mom, you always taught us not to be afraid of opportunities," said Junior during one of our Friday dinners. "Now, it's your turn to follow your own advice." With the support of my children, and trusting in Mrs. Lewis's competence, whom I promoted to manager of the main agency, I embarked on this new journey. The transition wasn't easy. I faced resistance from some older teachers who doubted my capacity or resented being passed over for the position. Some parents questioned if a woman without a husband could be a suitable example of leadership. But I had already learned to transform prejudices into fuel for my determination. I worked tirelessly to prove my worth, not out of vanity, but because I deeply believed in the importance of education as a tool for social transformation. The same education that had changed my trajectory could change that of hundreds of children under my responsibility. At home, the dynamics were also changing. Junior was preparing for college entrance exams, dreaming of the engineering school at the University of Chicago. Mary Helen, now a teenager, revealed herself as a talented artist, especially in painting. Robert, my introspective youngest, continued devouring books, developing a special love for American literature. Charles, keeping his word, maintained regular visits to the children, though our relationship remained strictly cordial. Once, during one of these visits, he looked at me differently. "You did it, didn't you? Everything you said you would do that night. You really did it." There was no resentment in his voice, just a sincere observation, perhaps even a touch of admiration. "I had no choice," I responded simply. "Or rather, I chose not to give up." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, sometimes I wonder how it would have been if I had stayed, if I hadn't made that mistake." For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine that alternative path. The preserved marriage, the intact family, the Sunday dinners with everyone at the table. But then I realized, in that scenario, I probably would never have discovered my own strength, never would have pursued higher education, never would have become a businesswoman or principal. The pain of betrayal, paradoxically, had been the catalyst for my transformation. We can't go back, Charles. What happened, happened. The important thing is that now we're doing the best for our children, each in our own way. That conversation marked a kind of definitive closure between us. We were no longer husband and wife with an open wound, but two people who once shared a life and now followed different paths, united only by the love for their common children. The following years brought both challenges and achievements. In 1978, Junior was admitted to the University of Chicago for engineering, fulfilling his dream. The celebration at our house was memorable. My son would be the first in the family to enter a prestigious university. My parents came from the countryside especially for the occasion. My father, emotional as I had rarely seen him. "My daughter," he said, holding my hands. "When you left home with that young man, I feared for your future. When you separated, I thought all was lost. Forgive an old man for doubting you. Look what you've built. Look at the man you raised." Those words healed old wounds that I didn't know were still open. My father's approval, so difficult to win, meant that I had finally completely transcended the stigma of the separated woman, the single mother, that society expected to fail. 1979 brought a decisive moment for American society. No-fault divorce laws were expanding across the country. Although Charles and I had been separated for more than a decade, we had never legally formalized the situation. Now, finally, we could regularize what life had already defined so long ago. The official divorce was calm, almost anticlimactic. We signed the papers without extreme emotions. Time had placated the hurts, transformed the broken love into a mature acceptance of the shared past. For me, that signature represented not the end of something, but the confirmation of a new beginning that had been underway for a long time. In the early 1980s, I faced another kind of challenge. Mary Helen, always my most impetuous child, announced that she wanted to study fine arts in New York. "It's the best art school in the country, Mom," she argued, eyes shining with hope. The idea of my daughter moving to another city terrified me. I still saw her as my little girl, although she was already a young woman of 18. My protective instinct screamed to keep her close, safe under my wings. But then I remembered the courage I needed to break with imposed expectations, to seek my own path. What right did I have to deny my daughter the same freedom to pursue her dreams? If that's what you really want, Mary Helen, then we need to plan how to make it possible, I replied, swallowing the fear that tightened my throat. Her smile, radiant with gratitude and relief, compensated for the tightness in my heart. In the following months, we saved for her move, researched safe dormitories, planned every detail. Charles, surprisingly, offered substantial financial help, perhaps his way of compensating for the years of absence. When I left her at the bus station, with her suitcases and dreams, I cried all the way back home, but there was an immense pride mixed with those tears, pride in the determined young woman I had raised, who now took flight with strong wings. In 1982, the real estate agency completed its expansion with the opening of the third unit. The business I once bought with so much fear now employed 17 people, mostly women, many in situations similar to mine from years ago. I made a point of hiring single mothers, separated women, widows, not out of charity, but because I recognized in them the same determination, the same need to prove their worth. Adversity either destroys you or strengthens you, I used to say to new hires. And women like us have already proven our strength just by standing here, moving forward. Robert, my youngest, surprised everyone by choosing law as a career. The quiet boy who loved literature transformed into an eloquent young man, passionate about social justice. In a conversation during his college vacations, he confessed to me the origin of that choice. I grew up seeing how difficult it was for you, Mom. How the laws, the system, everything seemed to conspire against women in your situation. I want to change.